back and change my answers if it were me, but I'd like to at least know that I'm the one who made this, because we're going to have to asterisk this in the report. I think we're going to have a discussion about how we deal with this.
Well, I think that when Holly shared with me the draft results, I saw that and I said, wow, this is concerning. And then she indicated that where this individual marked strongly disagree, their comments were affirmative. So it points to that they may have marked the wrong box. So I think that I think is contained or described in the report itself, in the narrative that follows this, and that's where it has to stand. But I'm curious, Stephen, you said when you completed a particular section, you couldn't cause the survey to go back to see how you completed it. Is that what I understood you saying?
I may be misrecalling, but at some point I wanted to go back to see, because either questions in one of the seemed duplicative to me. I wanted to see how if I was being consistent. Because some of these, to me, at least from my perspective, seem a bit sort of, I would say, arbitrary or emotional or whatever, because I don't really have a lot of data on some of the, my feelings about some of these issues. So I think at some point I tried to go back, and I don't think it was on this section necessarily, but I don't remember being able to do that.
Was that the case, Holly? Could you go back and review your responses? I can't recall.
It would have to be something that I go back and see if the tool allows that, and if it doesn't, that's also worth noting in the report, that there was an inability to go back and change.
Or review your answers once you'd given them.
Mm-hmm.
Well, if you just make a note so that during the presentation at the board meeting, we can respond to that.
Okay.
But I think that in the narrative, we've made note of the fact that where there was a strongly disagree response in this section, the comments were favorable. So it looks like it was not marked as intended. So I think we just have to stick with that explanation at this point.
Yeah, and I found the narrative very clear. I mean, I totally agree. The narrative alerted me to this, and it was very clear. So I have no questions about that. It was only that one issue about being able to go back as a respondent.
Okay, Claire, do you have any observation or concern about how this is phrased at this point, or what happened here?
Yes, thank you, Commissioner Scott. I had similar thoughts, and then I thought back to when I was doing the different evaluations, and I thought, once I got out of that section, as I recall, I thought, oh wait, I want to go back and check something, and I thought I couldn't. If you're in the section, you can go back and forth through the different questions and such. But once I moved to the next section, I have this vague recollection that I too was blocked. It was like section by section. Once you complete it, you're done and you have to move forward. And that frustrated me a bit. But I agree with you. I think with the comments and then the ratings, I thought, oh, either somebody misunderstood or maybe I misunderstood when I took it. And so that kind of confused me as well. And I think going by the comments, I think that is more indicative of the individual's position and perspective on the issue, regardless of the rating. Because sometimes when I look at, agree, strongly disagree, I sometimes get confused as well. It's like, do I strongly disagree or agree with that statement? And it can get confusing. So I think the comments were the best thing to judge the actual perspective by. Because I think we do get locked into each section. But I'm hoping we find out. Thank you.
Thank you, Commissioner Zavansky. All right, so with that, can we move on then, Holly?
Yes. So the other area to note in this section you'll see is the board's continuing education program equips members with the knowledge they need to be effective. And that's where 42.9% of the members either strongly agreed, disagreed, or remained neutral. And there were comments that kind of gave some light to that. So let's see, one of those, and these are noted in the report too, still on page 6 and 7, that let me make sure I'm reading these. I'm making sure, just one second. Let's see. I'm mixing up my sections. I just want to be clear. Let's see. Yes, okay. So with that 42.9%, the two comments that sort of shed a little bit more insight were that there was an expression or a request for subject matter experts to come in on training. And another suggestion offered that there were more opportunities to do external trainings in addition to what we have within our SSH staff, HSS staff. And there was also another comment that the virtual formatting, although it's necessary during the pandemic, that did create some challenges, although they're being expressed and addressed and improved upon in these areas. So that gave us a little bit more insight into where we see the variance in that question and the scoring.
Okay.
Yes.
All right, thank you.
So we can move on to the next slide, which is the board members' interactions and meeting activities. And this grand total score stayed the same as last year, with the majority of those statements, 85 to 100% of them being in the agree or strongly agree section, and ratings.
So we are harmonious and get along people. Good.
Good way to phrase it, yeah.
Right.
So this is a section 2 where we can see for the board members understand when it's appropriate to act in a fiduciary role, that we see both respondents with disagree and neutral. And so comments did give us a little bit more insight, one of which was we need to do a better job at fiduciary responsibilities to consider the cost of both members and employer. And we are fiduciaries first and foremost, and I hope reminders are continued. And when I looked back also in the previous year's report, there was suggestions around the same comment. So it may be, something to consider to have an annual fiduciary training offered. And I know there are some already posted on our website, but how the board interacts with those or uses that throughout the year could be considered.
All right.
Okay.
I'm sorry, Holly, can you comment on, there was a strongly disagree response to the board focuses on policy and strategy in addition to operations. And so, I was trying to match the comments that you posted with the evaluations, and either I didn't do a very good job or I missed it. Was there a comment to that effect? Because it is our responsibility, and so it does bear attention. If that is one member certainly feels that way. Was there a comment? Do you remember?
There was one, and it was particularly pointed at the RFP process.
Okay.
So the request, and I can read it.
That was my expectation that it had to do with the RFP. Okay.
Yeah. And the quote said that the RFP process required some review to remember how the HSB had impacted and influenced the RFP, and the role of HSB in the RFP process could have been better outlined as the RFP rolled out. And the HSB also continues to struggle with how the 5 areas of the strategic planning are being addressed by each action item, and how the action items on the agendas further implement or an implementation of the strategic plan. So it was a combination, actually, to correct myself earlier, that there was that specific comment to the RFP, but then also strategic plan connections on the board agendas.
Okay.
Because I don't know how other board members feel, but I feel that this gives us insight, as we look at what concerns are, and so somehow I think that that comment in that evaluation are important for the board, not just to sort of, well, as an outlier, because it looks like an outlier, but the comment is not an outlier in a sense, to me at least.
No,
And so I don't know if,
I
the way
agree.
to link that.
I agree, and I think that Holly, as you're making the report to the full board, it might be useful just to go right into that.
Okay.
Because you made note of it in the written statement, but just draw our attention to that and the related comment. And I think that we had in this governance committee meeting last fall a fulsome discussion about the RFP process and so forth. And I think that we have laid the groundwork that as we are now preparing for the Medicare RFP, that we're starting in a different place as a result of that prior experience. So we'll go from there.
Okay.
Excuse me.
I can note that in the final presentation. Were there any other questions on this section?
Not from me. Let's proceed.
Okay. So next page, please. Or next slide. All right, and this is on page 8 of the report, the goal setting and communications area, and the grand total score saw an increase of 0.2, and all of the 9 statements fell within that agree and strongly disagree, so 85% of the scores. And outliers are good to notice, just like President Follansbee had just noted that 2 of those statements received a 14.3 or of a neutral. And although there wasn't a specific or targeted statement in the comments, there were a few that touched on communications, and I can read those. One of them was a difficult question to answer, to know that since the format of the HSB is to interact with stakeholders through the monthly HSB meetings. The second one was whether we communicate to all parties is difficult to answer. And the third was not sure that we really know if there's a specific or correct communication. Most of our communication would involve benefits and policies that must be communicated back to staff and to membership. So these were sort of touching more on communication in general, but worth noting that there was several that didn't know how to respond to the or score.
On that, I think that possibly, and we might want to consider this as we go through, that if I'm not mistaken, there is a broad communications plan around open enrollment. And we've normally had that kind of highlighted as we go through open enrollment. We have had someone from communications actually come and talk to the board about what the communications plan is going to be around open enrollment. We did that for a couple of years, and maybe we need to go back to that as a starting point. But there are also other member-related communications that are through the website, around specific programs, that type of thing. And I'm sure that there is a broad, I shouldn't say I'm sure, I'll ask you, Abby, this, but I would think that there would probably be a broader member communication plan outside of the open enrollment process, that maybe if that was briefed to us as a board, that might help to inform all of us about ongoing communications to members and how that's being handled throughout the year. So, Abby, could you provide any insight into that?
Absolutely. As you may recall, in the strategic plan, we recognized the member communications was critical to our operation, and we did fund a position for a new communications director, Jessica. She came on board in February of last year, so her first year has been quite a challenge. But she's very much up to the task, and part of her work is developing an overall communications plan. But she spent the year, really understanding the operation and how it works, and then turning on a dime with all the changes in communications that we've had to experience going through the virtual world, upping the utilization of the website, bringing in a intern to help her look at the user interface on the website. I mean, she's done a lot in this last year. It's pretty miraculous, actually. And we're so fortunate to have hired her just in the nick of time. So I think she'd be more than happy to make a presentation to the board and describe where we're at and where she's headed.
Well, I think that might be very useful to have that happen, and you can pick the time when that would be. Because I think that, as I said, I'm pretty sure I recall this, that we did have, whenever we went into the open enrollment season, someone from the staff would come and say, this is what our plans are, this is what the booklet's going to look like, yada, yada, yada. But I know that there's been a lot of more robust activity in this area this past year, and it might be useful to at least have that highlighted, what things we did do last year and what things are being planned for this year.
Yeah, we'd be happy to do that.
Okay. All right. Holly, are there any other comments on this?
I'm sorry, Jessica's
Commissioner
on this call, so she heard all that.
Okay. Commissioner Follansby or Commissioner Tavansky, do you have any other comments or observations on this area?
No, I'm fine. And I actually greatly appreciate what I've seen coming out of communications. I think it's outstanding, and I'm glad we've got a director again. It's a significant role in HSS, both for communication to our membership especially. But I'm really happy with what I've seen so far, and congratulations to Jessica.
Thank you. Okay, Holly?
Yes, there was one other comment that it fell within the section worth noting is it reads, the communication seems strong. One thing to improve would be some broader communication about what the Health Service Board does, since I don't think most people know.
Okay.
So that actually brought to mind options on our website as a starting point, but it could be something we think about with Jessica and formulate any language.
All right. Well, we've normally had something in the directors or the annual report about board work and activity is another thing, but that's kind of after the fact. But Stephen, Commissioner Follansby?
I think our website does have a section on the board and the membership, and at least a statement about who we are and all that. We certainly don't visit that on a regular basis as a board to look and see if that's up to date and what the content is. And so I think that that's a good challenge to us as a board.
Commissioner Zavansky?
Sorry, I just want to let you all know that as someone who has been involved in a number, and I'm still involved in some active committees with regard to the SEIU population and also the IFPTE population, which is a significant chunk of our city employees. What I have learned over the years and what I still note is that most employees have absolutely no clue we exist, except when those of us who are elected have our election every 5 years, and then they're kind of stunned as to who we are and what we do. There has always been kind of an out of sight, out of mind. And I will say this also goes somewhat equally for our colleagues on the retirement board. There are some people who pay attention and many who don't. And there are also a significant number of employees who actually have no clue how their benefits work or that there's any relationship, except when they have an issue or a problem. And then they look to see if they know anyone. And those of us who have names that have been around for a long time, we get the calls. But I think that our section that says who we are, what we do, doesn't fully explain all of it. But, and I hate to put it this way, that I don't think that even if we went into greater depth, it would make a difference, because most employees just take benefits for granted in many, many ways and focus more on their work and what goes on there. And it's only when they sort of hit a hiccup or they face an open enrollment packet and they have to make decisions, do they even pay attention to benefits. So, I don't know what we can do with that, but it seems to be a reality. And I participate in SEIU's COPE committee. I'm an alternate delegate these days, but I attend those meetings, and that's probably one of the most active units in the SEIU 10-to-1. And I try to educate them at about every, 4 meetings out of 10 a year. And it helps, but even that group that is much more aware and involved with more aspects of their working environment are still limited in what they understand goes on at our board and also at retirement. So it's been an uphill battle for more than 30 years that I've been involved in it. And I think it just will continue to be an uphill battle for more years into our future, or maybe it's a constant. Thank you.
All right. Thank you for those comments. So we can possibly, as we're thinking about member communication, also talk about maybe looking at board function, role, that type of thing, and trying to educate from that standpoint, and give that some thought. And Abby, through you, we can maybe collaborate with the communications director around that part of the website that involves the board as well.
Yeah, and I think Jessica will be helpful in helping us clarify what our key messages are, because I'm hearing several in this conversation. So I think it'll be really helpful to determine that, because once we determine that, then we can look at ways to deliver that, because website is one way.
Right. Thank you. Okay, Holly? Holly?
On mute.
Okay.
Okay, so the next slide will be the last section to review, which is the board's interaction with management. And, the board had an overwhelming positive response to their interactions with membership, with management, with a grand total score increase of 0.2, and all of the statements, again, being in that agree and strongly disagree. There were 2 areas that did receive the 14.3, and one of those quotes was for the first section, which is the board ensures management has the necessary financial and human resources to achieve the organizational goals. Let me pull up that quote. In seeing this, I also went back to the previous year, and there was discussion around this too, of the understanding of the board's involvement in the financial and human resources. The one quote just shared that that the board has no control over the financial and human resources, and that was the only particular call out. And the other notable question that doesn't have a score, you'll see where the question is, our statement is, where feasible, the board engages in effective management succession planning. And there was a typo in this question. And there were, in the comments, there was multiple confusion points. And the typo read that the board engages in effective management succession planning. So it understandably, it could be confusing to, if I was in, a respondent, am I saying it is ineffective or am I saying it is effective? And with the variant responses, the question and the response was taken out. So unfortunately, we don't have the feedback on that.
Right.
But really, this section is very short because there was overwhelming comments of positivity, and so.
All right.
Yeah.
Let's go on to the is that the final slide? That's the final slide.
This is the final section. The next slide, which is the final slide, is the conclusion, or having pulled from the comments areas that the board may want to focus on.
Yes, that's where I was headed, please.
Okay. So next slide, please. So the 4 areas that maybe want to be considered is diversifying the board education resources, providing the regular strategic plan updates at board meetings, as well as on the board agendas. And then
Let me clarify that. So
okay.
providing regular strategic plan updates at board meetings, that's one aspect of that. And then making notations on agenda items in the board agenda that ties it back to a strategic goal. That's what we're talking about here.
Yeah, it might be clearer to break apart that bullet point.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. And then the 3rd bullet point is offering a timeline of the HSB involvement in future requests for proposal processes. And the final would be offering any annual fiduciary responsibility review by council.
And council is SEL.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Our legal. You're quite welcome, my counsel.
Here, Eric on the line. Yeah.
Right. Okay. I don't know if we want to briefly talk about that annual. I know this issue has come up sort of again and again regarding, the fiduciary role the commissioners have. And we did that one fiduciary review when we had the question about whether there was really enough funds in the trust fund,
Right.
whether it was worth trying to do something other than invest with the treasurer's office. And
Right.
we went through that process and we determined that because of the liquidity needs, and the overhead, that on balance, it was based on the recommendation of the actuary, it was not worth, it was more prudent to leave the funds with the treasurer's office.
Mm-hmm.
And so I just, I don't know, outside of going through that exercise again, what exactly, I've had this discussion with Abby, about what a fiduciary review would really look like. We've really spent a lot of time looking about, is there some sort of fiduciary review that's more applicable to this board, which really is not an investment board, but is obviously responsible for spending a lot of money on healthcare every year. And
I guess it's beyond just the finances. I think it's a question of we're sort of, I guess I see us as kind of the trustees of the system, if you will, that we are concerned not only about the finances, but the operations, the policy, decision-making. I mean, there are any number of ways that we exercise appropriate caution and care on behalf of the members and trying to assure that we're being consistent with the charge we have from the charter. And so the city charter. So I think it's beyond, I don't want to go down the road of finances and investments only. I think that the fiduciary duties and role of members and commissioners on this board is really kind of at the core of all of the things that we do, both in committee and at board meetings. And I'd like to take a broader approach to that. And maybe that might be helpful in maybe framing what we might want to talk about under this topic.
And I'm just sort of flagging that where that discussion would go would be, the attorneys coming up with a general standard that's like the financial standard of what would a reasonable commissioner do on a similar board under like circumstances. And that's the standard. And then, as to the application of that standard, that's where it would get to be complicated because there's just not that many public sector commissions that are similarly situated. But obviously we have the actuary. And obviously one key component of being an actuary is relying on outside experts, whether it's expert fiduciary counsel or the expert actuaries. Or the expert staff.
I have had with another consulting firm and I won't say their name publicly, they do have a program on corporate governance, if you will. I recognize that's not us, but it does talk about being a member of a board and what your accountabilities are and that sort of thing. So, you know, it may be that we're looking at either the public sector or the nonprofit sector and seeing if indeed there's some sort of training around the role of board members as fiduciaries or something.
I know
like that.
Claire's about to raise her hand, but the governance issue we did with the Anucci, and that's how we developed all of those governance policies. We had an outside consultant. They actually came in for several years and did annual reviews. And
yes, I understand.
That's, you know, if that's something you obviously you could talk to Abby about, whether, you know, you want to at some point get a consultant to come in and look at our governance policies and review them. And I think we do that periodically anyhow. I just think that's distinct from a fiduciary review, but obviously related, because a prudent commissioner would obviously have up-to-date policies.
Yes, and we did that in 2019 and committed to do it about every 3 years or so. Commissioner Savansky?
Thank you. I just wanted to add that the International Foundation of Employee Benefits has a specific program on fiduciary responsibility. And in the past, a lot of us, when we attended those conferences, especially when we began, took those classes or those, I guess they're now modules. So that's one area where we should look again into what they offer, because I found that most helpful. And their approach is, because almost everybody who is involved in that organization and the people who attend are all trustees at various types of boards that are similar to ours. Most of them, many of them public, not all. Some are through other employer organizations or unions, but everybody's focused on pensions and pension and health combination. Yes. And while we're a little bit unique to be separated out from that, there are other groups that are like us, and I found that their training modules were very, very helpful. And we actually had someone on our commission at one time who went off to, when he left our board, went to continue a career with IFEB, and I think he helped formulate some of those modules so that they incorporated more of our perspective. The other thing I'd like us to look at, well, we have a specific charge through the charter. We're a trust fund, and there's trust fund rules and laws that say all assets and liabilities belong to the members. And so I believe that I probably incurred the wrath of a rather high-ranking member of our current government, because I always have seen my fiduciary responsibility as making sure that we had the resources to run our office appropriately, but also that we had the resources to provide the best health benefits we could for our members. And I focus a lot on my fiduciary responsibility with regard to the members of this system, since they're the ones who elect me and they're the ones I represent, and have strongly held that focus and have voted accordingly. And my perspective with regard to issues on the board is usually from that perspective. But I would go back, and by the way, as Mr. Rappaport commented, Tommy Anucci provided us with some incredible workshops that we found most helpful with regard to governance, and we'd have to go out to bid, I guess, or make some decisions with regard to that. But that's one firm that offers some incredible training as well. So I think those are two resources, and I pick those up when I monitor the retirement board. They're still providing their commissioners with all of the class lineup and information at every meeting with regard to what the courses are that are available. So I suggest that maybe we consider doing something like that at least a few times a year with regard to our board agendas. Thank you.
All right. Thank you, Commissioner. So we'll look at this an annual fiduciary responsibility. It's really more of training, not just annual training on fiduciary responsibility for the board. Maybe we can.
May I make a comment on this?
Yes, please.
Yeah,
Karen.
I agree with just what you just said, Randy. That is what it is, a fiduciary training to remind us what our responsibilities are. It
Yes.
doesn't have to get all that complicated into the financial and all this. It's not that complicated. I have several articles from it still from the International Foundation when I must have taken a few classes when they had.
Well, I did too
Yeah.
a few years ago, and they went into this. So what we'll make note of this as our annual fiduciary training
Right,
for the board.
good.
And then we'll take off by legal counsel because it may come from the International Benefits Foundation or some other source, but some annual revisiting of that.
And another thing, what goes in step with that is conflict of interest.
Yes.
In other words, if you're a fiduciary, there are certain things that you shall not do or cannot do.
That's
and
correct.
They go toe and toe, really. So that's.
And we have the conflict of interest training and so forth that we've had to go, that mandatory training from the city.
Right.
That's done, or we're supposed to be doing it. I think that's annually. So that would be a complement to that effort. All right.
And I could talk to the Ethics Counsel, Andrew Shen, about whether he could come and do a presentation on conflict of interest.
Mm-hmm.
If this board and with the Abby's consent feels that something more is needed regarding conflict of interest.
Okay, thank you, Eric. We appreciate that. Okay, Abby, is that the conclusion of this report? Or Holly, I'm sorry.
Yes, Commissioner Scott, that's the conclusion. And I'll just note that the next steps will be for me to take back the notes from today's meeting and present it at the full board meeting in February 11th.
All right, with that as the follow-up action and the discussion that we've had to date, I'm willing to entertain a motion.
I move we accept the report as modified.
Second.
Okay, it's been properly moved and seconded that we accept the draft report as the discussion and modifications have been defined during the course of the meeting. So the idea is that we'd be recommending that this be sent to the board inclusive of our comments and discussion with those changes. That's the sense of the motion. Is there any further discussion? Hearing none, we'll now have public comment on this item.
Thank you, Commissioner Scott.
Good afternoon, Board Commissioners. This is your moderator. I will be taking responsibility for the full public comment section, including reading procedures and instructions while our Board Secretary is focused on presenting. Public
All right,
comment.
thank you.
Of course. Public comment will be available for each item on this section. Each speaker will be allowed 3 minutes to comment in length unless the Board President deems new public comment time limits in the board meeting. All public comments are to be made concerning the agenda items that has been presented. Any public comment made by a member of the public that is outside of the current agenda presentation will be asked to hold their comment for the appropriate agenda item called. As a reminder, a caller may ask questions of the policy body or individual members, but there is no obligation to answer or engage in dialogue with the caller. When I welcome you on the call, you are encouraged to state your name clearly, although you may remain anonymous. When your 3 minutes has ended, I will thank you for your comment and you will be placed back on hold. Webex calling instructions. Opportunities to speak during the public comment period are available via phone by dialing 415-655-0001. Again, 415-655-0001, entering access code 146-762-6811. Again, 146-762-6811. Then pressing pound and pound again. You will then enter the meeting as an attendee on the public comment call line. Callers, if you have dialed in and wish to speak to this agenda item specifically, please remember to dial *3 now to be added to the public comment queue. When the system says your line has been unmuted, this is your time to speak. For those already on the line, please continue to hold until the system indicates you have been unmuted. When I welcome you on the call, you are encouraged to state your name clearly. I'll check now to see if there are any callers in the public comment queue. Board Commissioners, we have one caller on the line. There are no callers in the queue at this time. A final reminder to callers, you must dial *3 now if you want to join public comment. We will wait 5 more seconds and close public comment for this agenda item. Board Commissioners, seeing that there are still no callers in the public comment queue at this time, public comment is now closed.
Thank you very much. So public comment now being closed, we're now ready to vote on the motion that we accept the draft report as discussed and edited at this meeting for referral to the full board meeting in February. All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Those opposed, no one in opposition. It's carried unanimously. We'll now go to item number 4.
Thank you, Commissioner Scott. The agenda item number 4 is to review and approve the draft 2020 education report, an action item.
All right. This item is contained in the document that was sent with the meeting agenda materials. And so with that, I'd ask that Holly serve again as our narrator on what is contained in this annual report. We have again been doing this. I think this is about our 4th or 5th year for this activity as well. We began a process a few years back, and I can't remember exactly when, that our November board meeting has normally been an education, was billed as an education forum. There were a lot of moving parts with the Affordable Care Act and a lot of other stuff that helped to influence that. And then we began to look more broadly to say, well, we need to look at board education, not just in one meeting, but across the continuum of our activity and operations as a board, both internal and external education. And so we have annually, as part of the strategic plan, tried to integrate this effort with that ongoing effort. So with that, Holly, please.
Thank you, Commissioner Scott. We can move to the next slide. There's only about 2 slides I put together for this, and really it's to highlight the education achievements of this year. So in 2020, in April, there was a four-part non-Medicare healthcare plan rating methodology presentation. And as Commissioner Scott was just saying, the November education forum featured a Medicare market update, which is in direct response to the option of having an RFP around Medicare in the future. And then in December, the board received the Health Insurance Portability and Accountability Act training. And the board also approved the Phase 1 SFHSS Racial Equity Action Plan, which within that are educational outlines and roadmaps for continued education for the board and the department. And then that was followed up with a presentation on the social determinants of health. And those are noted in the report. And then the next slide will show us more of the future planning. And just wanted to thank all the board members again for participating in a very short survey that went out last week of the 6 areas that had been either noted from throughout last year or had been brought up at board meetings of areas of education that wanted to be featured. So there were 6 in total, and they were board members were asked to rank them. So of those, the board members ranked the top priority would be making sure that there was a mental health stigma education. The second would have been culturally competent care session. Third being an opioid update, including medication-assisted treatment. And fourth, the pharmacy high-cost drugs and genomics. And then the 5th, equally tied, was the dental quality care and Medicare quality measurements. And so those were the 6 that were presented as options to the board and to rank. And of course, there was a section for members to ask for any suggestions or additional requests. And so 3 stood out, which is not surprising now that we see our survey results: fiduciary duties, refresher, social determinants of health, which was considered to be put into the 6 options. And they weren't because the Racial Equity Action Plan already approved will outline continued education sessions around social determinants of health. So it's guaranteed that those will continue, but working with our team to find out the succession planning of it. And then the third suggestion was actually called up from the board meeting last week, so it didn't make it into the survey, was more transparency of healthcare costs. And that'll also, develop with the new administration and the Affordable Care Act that we'll see in the coming months. There was an actual, a very specific request, which would really be deemed more as an update to the board. It was around actuarial cost analysis projections for COVID. So I didn't place it on here, but it's been noted to be brought to the board at full board meetings.
Well, I would ask that you put that on there if you would,
okay.
So yeah. It doesn't get lost in this effort. And it's the trying to look at the impact of COVID on premium rates. Mm. And I recognize that there may be some delay. We've talked about health plan or member suppression of their access to various health plan services. That was noted in our dental discussion this year, and it probably is true in vision and the health plan as well. And I guess the ongoing question will be, how will that impact premium rates over time? So
yeah. It's very much top of mind and embedded in all of our rates discussions. So,
but I think
go ahead and put it in there because we'll need it.
Well, it's really trying to make us as a board aware of what you're discussing, so that we can keep it top of mind as well.
Exactly.
Yeah. Okay.
On the same page.
All right. In the actual written document, the draft document, Holly, there is one edit that I would like to provide to you at this meeting. And it's in the last paragraph of the board education concerning the strategic plan goals for 2022, so forth. Okay. And it's like the 3rd line from the bottom.
Okay.
It says the REAP presentation was accompanied by a joint social determinants of health presentation. I think that would read a little more clearly if it read as follows: the REAP presentation was accompanied by a joint HSS staff presentation on the social determinants of health.
Okay. Noted. Yeah, got that.
Okay. So I think that would clear that up, that highlighted an overview of the disparities and so forth and so on. Then down into the future educational planning,
Mhm.
I would suggest that you, after the paragraph that's above the box,
Mhm.
okay, it says the 2021 education topics presented to the commissioners and so forth. I think if you said that based on a board survey,
Okay.
okay, and use the exact same thing that you've done here as the explanation
Okay. In the slide.
in the slide, that would clear all of that up and just that would take out that whole paragraph.
Okay. Yeah. I'll take the visual of the slide and just drop it into the document.
Right. And just take the rest of that paragraph out of there because this is what this tells. And based on the survey, here were the board results, and that's what you've done on the slide.
Okay. Yeah. Were there any other suggestions I could include in the report?
Stephen?
Not for me, no.
Commissioner Savansky?
I'm fine with what you have. Thank you.
Okay. Any other comments? Karen? Commissioner Breslin? If not, we'll go to public comment. Or I'm sorry.
I think you need a motion first.
I'm sorry, I just retracted that. I'm ready to entertain a motion on this item.
I move that we approve the draft of the 2019 education report, or the 2020 education report with the modifications and additions as discussed.
Okay, is there a second?
Second.
It's been properly moved and seconded that we accept the draft report with the edits and discussion modifications. And with that, we're now ready to move to public comment on item 4.
We will now open up public comment for this item. Public comment procedures. Public comment will be available for each item on the agenda. Each speaker will be allowed 3 minutes to comment in length, unless the board president deems new public comment time limits in the board meeting. All public comments are to be made concerning the agenda item that has been presented. Any public comment made by a member of the public that is outside of the current agenda presentation will be asked to hold their comment for the appropriate agenda item called. As a reminder, a caller may ask questions of the policy body or individual members, but there is no obligation to answer or engage in dialogue with the caller. When I welcome you on the call, you are encouraged to state your name clearly, although you may remain anonymous. When your 3 minutes has ended, I will thank you for your comment. You will be placed back on mute, and we will unmute the next caller. Webex calling instructions. Opportunities to speak during the public comment period are available via phone now by dialing 415-655-0001. Again, 415-655-0001. Entering access code 146-762-6811. Again, entering access code 146-762-6811. Then pressing pound and pound again. You will then enter the meeting as an attendee on the public comment call line. Before we begin public comment, we will take 10 seconds to pause to allow time for callers to dial in using the information that is on the screen. Callers, if you have dialed in and wish to speak to this agenda item specifically, please remember to dial *3 now to be added to the public comment queue. When the system message says your line has been unmuted, this is your time to speak. For those already on hold, please continue to wait until the system indicates you've been unmuted. When I welcome you on the call, you are encouraged to state your name clearly. I'll now see if there are any callers in the public comment queue at this time. Board commissioners, we have 0 callers on the phone line. Public comment is now closed.
All right, public comment is now closed. We will now be prepared to vote on the motion that's pending. on the education report. All those in favor signify by saying aye.
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 All those opposed? Hearing no opposition, the motion is adopted unanimously. We'll now move to item number 5.
Agenda item number 5 is the opportunity for the public to comment on matters within the board's jurisdiction and the opportunity to place items on future agendas, a discussion item. Our moderator will let us know.
Board Commissioners, we have 0 callers on the phone line at this time. We will wait 10 seconds to allow public comment callers to dial in. A reminder that you can dial in via phone now at 415-655-0001. Again, 415-655-0001, entering access code 146-762-6811. Again, 146-762-6811, then pressing pound and pound again. You will then enter the meeting as an attendee on the public comment call line. I will now check to see if any other callers have entered the public comment queue. Board Commissioners, we still have 0 callers on the phone line. Public comment is now closed.
Thank you. Now that public comment is closed on item 5, I'd like to have those commissioners who are on the call to note that this particular item is combined. We normally have taken each point of this, one to play the opportunity for public to comment on matters within the board's jurisdiction, and then we've gone out and had public comment on that item, and then subsequently we have gone out to say, okay, the next item for discussion is the opportunity to place items on future agendas. And we've gone out and again, with the webinar environment, I'm hoping that we would adopt this practice in our general board meetings to combine these 2 items at the tail end of our agenda. We spent some 20 minutes in this effort at the last board meeting. I wouldn't say 20, but at least 10 plus minutes going through this protocol when we could combine these 2 items. And that's just a suggestion, President Follansby and Director Yant. So I don't think we are in any way excluding people from commenting, but just the process of that is very time consuming.
Yeah, Commissioner Scott, this is Eric Rappaport, your general counsel. I hate to interrupt. After we set the agenda, I followed up with our government team attorneys, and I think what we decided would probably be better going forward is just to leave it as public comment and take the opportunity to place items on the agenda just off the future agendas altogether, because realistically, a lot of the times when board members have been requesting items get put on a future agenda, it's tied to a specific discussion item. And I think the commissioners know that they can basically request an item be put on the agenda at any time. Yes. But there was while it's a close call, there was some sense that these 2 really shouldn't be combined. I know we went ahead and combined them for this one. So I think I was going to talk to Abby and Holly, but we were thinking that the better course of action would just leave the general public comment open with the understanding that commissioners can request to put an agenda item on basically at any time during the meeting, and they can even do it during the public comment. But I like the idea of reducing items on the agenda, which is I wholeheartedly support.
Thank you very much, my counsel, and I'm glad that you had that preliminary discussion. But that was the intent, to try to streamline the process, yet preserve the opportunity for the public and the board members to add and to engage in comment.
Yeah.
So it's not trying to short circuit the input in any way, but to look for a way to streamline the amount of time around doing this process. So that was the intent. and I didn't want the meeting to end without a reference to that specific change, and we'll make it accordingly as the next agendas are issued and prepared, I hope.
Right.
And I will add that I think makes a lot of sense. There's been some discussion about this, I think, already with Holly, myself, and Abby as well. And I think that helps clarify.
Even you're breaking up and the last portion of
announcement. Oh, okay. So in any case, we've had some of this discussion preliminarily. If we do go ahead with this, then we will go ahead and make an announcement at the general meeting that this has been the issue and what the intent is, and all that, to try to make sure that all listeners and call-in and members of the health service system and interested parties are aware of the change.
All right. Thank you very much, Stephen. And with that, we're at item number 6. If there's no further comment from the board members.
Actually, Commissioner Scott, I'd like to add something to the previous conversation.
Yes, please.
Thank you. It was my impression that item was on the agenda, not just for board members who I think we know or should know that we could request something to go on on future agendas, but it was also an opportunity for others, whether they are reps from our providers or members of our membership, that they would have an opportunity, because during public comment, we have an option to consider what they say or not consider what they say, or engage or not engage. But this item allowed for members and others to come forward with issues that perhaps they thought we should address or would consider to address, and they can do it in a way that isn't limited to public comment, so that there's a different level of acceptance or hearing of those recommendations. And while it's rare, most items end up being repeated from earlier in the agenda. We discussed, issues in Tuolumne, or, issues of something else, and we want it put on the board, or we want something additional with regard to retiree dental or active dental. But I thought that this opened the door to others who weren't just board members or senior staff or actuaries, and that was my understanding of this item. So I just don't want that door closed, and I am not in favor of extending our board meetings and items, but I just want that full inclusion to be noted and to be allowed and made.
Okay, Commissioner Zvansky, I thank you for that clarification. And in light of that clarification, I think I'll try and go back to the government team and see if we can figure out a way to combine them with a member focus. So it'll be, chance for members to comment on any matter with the board jurisdiction, including requesting that, items be put on future agendas. And I'll see if that'll work.
Sounds good to me. Thank you.
We'll look forward to this now being taken up by our board president and our council and the executive director for the next board meeting. Good luck.
Thank you.
To all of you.
Challenge accepted. Thank you very much.
So with that, if there's nothing else, the meeting stands adjourned.
Thank you.
Thank you very much for your participation today.
Thank you for everyone's participation as well.
Thank you, commissioners. Thank you.
Thank you.